I will call the August 11th meeting of the Traffic and Parking Advisory Board meeting to order. Good afternoon and welcome. The Traffic and Parking Advisory Board reviews items of interest regarding parking and traffic items. We are an advisory board, and our favorable recommendation today will go before the Oshkosh Common Council. The council can accept or reject any recommendation from this board. If you don't agree with our decision, you can discuss the item with any council member. If the board does not recommend an item, a common council member may sponsor a new ordinance regarding that same item. All items do require 2 readings before the common council. The first reading will take place on Tuesday, August 25th at 6 p.m., and you will be allowed to speak on the item at that time, though the council will take no action. On Tuesday, September 8th at 6 p.m., the item will be on a second reading, at which time the council will take action. You will again be allowed to speak. For this afternoon's meeting, I will read each agenda item, at which time, if you'd like to speak, please step to the podium, give your name and address. I do ask that you keep your comments pertinent to the agenda item in question. The item will then come back to the board for discussion and action. Please call the roll for quorum purposes.
Christensen,
Here.
Staple,
Here.
Chazinski,
Here.
Eliason, Rousey, Schneider,
Here.
Becker.
Here. Which brings us to the opportunity for public comment. The board has in fact adopted a public participation policy which provides 15 minutes for general public comment on first come, first served basis. Citizens, again, as I stated before, must provide both name and address and may speak on matters related to traffic items within the authority of the board. Statements should be addressed to board members and not to staff or other persons. Items that are on the agenda should be addressed at the time the item is read and not during the period for public comment. Statements are limited to 3 minutes, and citizens may provide comment only once. If comments are provided, and you are certainly welcome to do so, you can provide them via email. See the city's website for the appropriate address. Otherwise, we will move immediately then into our first agenda item, since there is no public in view, of approval of minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Anyone with any comments, concerns, additions, or deletions? Seeing none, I will call the roll on approval of minutes.
Christensen,
Aye.
Staple,
Aye.
Chazinski,
Aye.
Schneider,
Aye.
Becker.
Aye. Which brings us to tabled business, and I believe, Mr. Collins, there is none.
No.
Okay, which then brings us to new business. First item and only item being e-scooter regulation and pilot study.
Okay, so we have Amy with us from the city attorney's office, and then we have Mark Lyons, who's our planning director, is on WebEx. We're trying to get ahead of this. A person had contacted the city and was interested in starting a dockless e-scooter program. We don't really have anything regulating them currently, so Amy had researched some options where e-scooters aren't allowed in the city based on current ordinances and statutes, and we also looked into what other cities have or have not allowed. And just a brief summary, in 2019, the state passed a law legalizing the use of electronic scooters on roadways, sidewalks, bicycle lanes, and bicycle ways. And an electric scooter, under that statute, is defined as a device that weighs less than 100 pounds, has handlebars, electric motor, and is powered solely by the electric motor and human power with a maximum speed of no more than 20 miles per hour. So under the state law, the city can regulate the rental and operation of electric scooters, but must do it in the same way that it regulates bicycles, with some exceptions. And the exceptions are, and that's more what we're going to talk about, a city can restrict or prohibit the operation of scooters on roads in excess of 25 miles per hour, the operation of scooters on sidewalks and bicycle ways, and or the short-term commercial rental of scooters to the general public. A city may also establish requirements and or limitations for the parking of scooters on the same such places. Right now, Milwaukee and Madison are the only cities we're aware of that adopted an ordinance regulating commercial rental of e-scooters. Both of them prohibit the commercial rental unless they're conducted as part of a pilot program. Madison's not completed a pilot program. Milwaukee did a pilot study in 2019, they recommended a 2020 pilot study based on the data they had, but it never happened due to the pandemic. So they currently have any future use of e-scooters on hold. So what we're going to discuss is So we could either, whether we restrict the commercial rental of e-scooters or not, the state law still would allow citizens to privately purchase e-scooters and use within the city. So I guess we got to consider a couple different things. I think Amy can probably break it down better.
Yeah, and so I'll try to break down your decision points today. Dockless systems are the first point. And that's you might have heard of Lime, Bird. They're companies that are coming in. They'll put the scooter on the sidewalk or on other parking areas. The person can, and it's dockless. There's not any sort of physical structure. So the person would take the scooter, drive, park it there, wherever that is, and then the next person could find it on their app, pick that scooter up and take it elsewhere in the city. Right now, the concern is e-scooters, but there are other forms of dockless dockless systems, including bikes. So we can have a conversation on any sort of dockless system if we want that. There are, and Mark can talk to some concerns probably more than I can. I know in talking with the Milwaukee attorneys on the dockless systems, there was concerns on the public nuisance in terms of where people were stashing them. Were they throwing them in the river? Were they throwing them in, big piles? So there's some concerns from just a public nuisance. There's also concerns on safety and how people were using these devices. So again, it's a new form of transportation. I don't have a lot of details. Again, Milwaukee hasn't released the results of their pilot study yet for me to report to you, which I believe is kind of the impetus that staff is recommending. Hey, let's just prohibit these dockless systems unless it's part of a pilot study. Now, I don't have the details of the pilot study right now. That would be something to be worked out later, but it would be a form of control so that it's not just this free-for-all if it comes to the city. To give you an anecdote, the way it happened in Milwaukee is when Summerfest happened in 2018, I believe it was Bird just showed up and started putting these scooters in the parks, kind of unregulated, and it resulted in federal litigation and state launching it. So there can be some concerns here. Again, that's why staff was recommending let's prohibit dockless systems unless they're part of a pilot study that we come up with whenever it's applicable. So that's kind of the first discussion point. What do you want to do with the dockless systems? Second discussion point is dockless systems only apply to the commercial rental. If you wanted to go and purchase an e-scooter, that would be completely separate from this rental component. There are some restrictions on what we can regulate as a city, but as Jim pointed out, some of the things we can regulate for e-scooters are, do we want them on roads in excess of 25 miles per hour? And do we want them on sidewalks? So those are two prohibitions to consider in addition to the dockless part of it, the commercial rental side. Do we want to just prohibit, or not just, in addition, do we want to prohibit their use on roads in excess of 25 miles per hour? And do we want to prohibit them on sidewalks? To give you some context to kind of what Madison and Milwaukee are doing, as Jim indicated, both Madison and Milwaukee are restricting the dockless systems unless part of a pilot program. In terms of the 25 mile per hour restriction and the sidewalk restriction, Madison is not restricting either of those. Milwaukee is restricting on sidewalks. They are not restricting on roadways above 25 miles per hour. So that kind of gives you a lay of the land. Again, the discussion points are on the dockless system, what we want to do with that, and whether you want to do those additional restrictions on sidewalks and on roads that are more than 25 miles per hour. And Mark, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add?
No, I mean, that pretty much covers what we've learned in a short period of time about this since it was brought to our attention. When we look at it from the planning side, it's trying to strike a balance. How do we promote other methods of transportation that maybe could help some people get around the city versus the public safety and public nuisance aspect of that? I think planning at this point agrees it's probably best to put a prohibition on them until we can set up a pilot program and see how this would work in our community, similar to what a lot of other communities have decided to do.
And Mark, have you talked to the person that was interested in this? Have you talked to him recently, or?
Yep, so I spoke with him yesterday, kind of letting him know what we were looking at doing. If we do go the route of establishing a pilot program, he would like to be part of the discussion. We set the parameters and talk through how we would maybe want to set up a pilot program. And it may be beneficial for us to include him in those discussions, just with somebody with a little more insight in the industry and how it's working as we establish the program.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess that's what we wanted the board's input on. So we're recommending that we basically restrict the use of the implementation of the dockless e-scooters until we can get a pilot study set up. Staff's in favor of setting up a pilot study. However, we don't want them just to show up without any parameters. So that was our recommendation there. So that, like Amy said, that's our first discussion. And then the second discussion is for non-commercial, do we want to restrict those? And if so, where and how?
So this is on the non-commercial side. So would we be able to specify that they have to make a certain amount of noise so they're not a silent killer coming up on you?
No.
No.
The only things because state law preempts us. So
Okay.
state law has kind of the guidelines of what an electronic scooter is, and it
Sure.
doesn't have any sort of noise requirements. The only things that we can regulate are 25 miles per hour over. We can regulate on sidewalks and bicycle lanes, and we can also we can limit where it parks, but if it's not commercial, those concerns are lessened because it's not like they're going to just be parking it randomly. They're going to be picking it back up and going.
And do you need an operator's license?
Technically, you would need a driver's license if you are on the roadway.
But on the sidewalk you would not? Okay.
I'm going to share a quick story, if I might. I spent 10 days in Atlanta over Christmas last year before everything hit the fan. I witnessed on 4 straight days the same scooter in the same place in front of my hotel. So they get left behind. It belongs to someone other than the person using it. So they don't care where it gets left. That's a concern. Jim raises a good point. I also witnessed someone get schmucked by someone on a scooter that came up from behind them. They allow it apparently on the sidewalk in Atlanta. Person 20 feet in front of me took a little wobble to the left and got clipped by a scooter coming up from behind them. I can't tell you how strenuously I object to this whole process. I think it's a disaster waiting to happen from a public safety perspective. I don't think we should whet people's appetites with doing a pilot study either, because if we start a pilot study in August, obviously that's not going to happen this year, but if push comes to shove and we launch one next August, every kid at UWO is going to go gangbusters with it, and then it's going to be trying to take candy away from a 1-year-old. So I have no interest whatsoever in moving forward in any way, shape, or form. A quick question from the planning perspective: is the person proposing this local, or is this from somewhere outside general area?
It's a local person who goes to school out in New York, but they are a local individual.
So absentee owner when push comes to shove. Is that a fair characterization?
I don't know if I would say absentee owner. I think they're completing their schooling and looking to reinsert themselves in the area.
Jim, I do want to clarify,
Mhm.
I misspoke before. I thought the licensing requirement dealt with roadway. They define it as highway, which there is some gray area, but there is case law that arguably sidewalk is included within the highway. So there is I changed my last opinion. I think there is an
Okay.
argument that you do have to have a driver's license to drive an e-scooter. I do know that regardless of state law, most of these rental companies require that. I just wanted to, I
Okay,
looked it
yeah.
up and I do think you do need a driver's
No, I
license,
appreciate
even on a
that.
sidewalk.
And where I was coming from is I've been in cities that have these,
Yep.
and I can't tell you how many times I've almost gotten hit because you don't hear them coming.
And regardless of whether or not you need a license, I think
And if you're on the
safety
sidewalk, you're
concerns
more
are-
likely to do that. So I would be very much against allowing them to be on the sidewalk. And that's why I was asking about the license, if that
Yep.
was the way
Mhm.
to keep them.
Yep, I just
Only in the
wanted to
roadway.
correct, yeah, cause I flipped open and I was like, oh, it says highway, not roadway, and
Okay.
highway arguably encompasses, the sidewalk as well.
Okay. All right, and whether we have the pilot study and have the rental thing with some of the bad things that may come from that or not, I still wouldn't want somebody schmucking people
Mm-hmm,
because they're silent on the sidewalk, where you don't really expect something going 20, 25 miles an hour to be sneaking up behind you where you don't hear them coming.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we, whether it's private or commercial, we could restrict the use of, the use on sidewalks and or roads in excess of 25 miles an hour is what it says.
Who's liable when someone inevitably gets hit?
that's a good question. The person, it would be the person that was negligent.
But my point being is, it's pretty easy to dump and run with a scooter. Good luck. I would applaud OPD if they could find the person after that.
Especially if we're still wearing masks.
Ba-dum-bum.
But you still need to have some type of identification. You need to have a credit card. You need to have some way that when you get to that scooter that you can identify yourself. So if the scooter hits somebody, the driver runs off, there's still, a good chance that they would know who was the driver. Why does it have to be dockless? I see somebody, I'm gonna run this scooter to, down through the, farmer's market, or to the farmer's market. And I drop my scooter off, I'm done with it, I go on my phone and I do the apps, it's done with it. So if somebody comes along and says, hey, there's a scooter, let's take it. So the last person that had it was me, so I would be then responsible for that scooter, but they would not actually be able to operate it because they would have to have the correct app and identification.
And a lot of these questions I won't be able to answer because I think that is not a legal question, that's more of the operation of how does the device work.
Okay.
And that's probably specific to the company, whatever brand it is, and the parameters of whatever we decide for a pilot program.
And I'm gonna go along with what Dan said. Last September, we were in Romania. And they're very popular there, but they're all docked. So you have to go from one dock to another, to another, to another. But the people operating them, 90% were operating responsibly, but 10% weren't. And the 10% are the ones that are gonna run into somebody, they're gonna sneak up behind you and scare the heck out of you. And I go along with Dan. Personally, I don't see a demand for this. I don't see why we have to do this. And I just think it's not a good idea.
I just think it creates irresponsibility development. And to be You could say you can't be on a sidewalk, but it's gonna happen, or bike lane, or the speed limit deal. I think the clientele that uses the uses that, isn't going up. And it's just an irresponsible situation.
We can't restrict private citizens from, as you said, purchasing their own
Correct.
and riding them under whatever guidelines we so choose. Now, if someone chooses to operate outside those parameters, do we as the city have the opportunity to set a municipal ordinance for violations
That
of
is
that?
what we are addressing right now.
With
So,
some teeth,
sorry, what was that?
with some teeth.
I mean, as with all municipal ordinance, it would be a fine. So we would draft it and there would be a citation amount. Generally, general citations are $75 with court costs. That comes to $232 per citation. So that would probably be the starting point, and again, our prohibitions would be operating on the sidewalk or operating on a street above 25 miles per hour for a private citizen.
And I'm okay with that, because
Yep.
we don't have any leeway there, I mean,
Yep.
to allow or disallow. I just want to make sure there's some teeth for a violation, because it does, again, I said it before, really present a public safety issue on the sidewalk.
And I will admit, I have not fully looked at our penalties, so I'd want to look at some other, like what's our penalty for other improper use of sidewalks, just to make sure it's consistent, but generally it's a $75, and that gets you to the $232.
And I guess I would like to see, to put in the restriction of not on sidewalk and the 25 miles per hour. I would be more open to doing the pilot program thing, because I think there are times that might be a good thing, like when the EAA's here. They may not be here all the time, but they may be here those 2 weeks. And, you know, generally if they're pilots, they're more responsible. They're, you know, I can see things when it would work. I know I've used them in other cities, not the motorcycles, but the bikes that you do the same way. And they're really nice when you're a visitor and don't want to rent a car and all the rest of that. So I'd be open to that, but as a pilot program. But I can't tell you how many times I've seen people get schmucked because you can't hear them coming, all the electric things. And frankly, just regular bicycles too, but they usually don't get heavy, you know, fast enough. And if you don't have somebody heavy like me on them, they're not heavy enough to do much damage to you either. But something with an engine would be a different story, I think.
Yeah, and I think we had mentioned that I think they were looking to start probably in the university area. I know that there was a dockless bike company a couple of years ago that was interested in the university area. However, they never got through whatever legal hurdles they had with the university, so that never really took off. And it's kind of now shifted from that was bicycles to now, you know, now they're more into the e-scooters and e-bikes and things like that. So I think in addition to this, and I know, I think we've talked about it here previously, and then there was somebody that was going to do Segway tours. I think that was a couple of years ago. So Amy had also mentioned that we probably, so we got the pilot, what you want to recommend as far as the pilot study goes, and then also what we want to recommend as far as the regulation of sidewalks and then on roads that are more than 25 miles an hour. And I think that part, my opinion is whatever we decide for the e-scooters, we should probably also include the Segways because they're real similar. I think that's
And right, I did talk with Jim, and I was kind of letting you guys have the e-scooter discussion before I threw more fuel on the fire. But the city does have similar authority to restrict Segways or electronic personal assisted mobility devices. I think that's the long term, on sidewalks and on roads that are over 25 miles per hour.
You know, if I remember right, when we did Segways, we thought they'd probably be okay, like in the bike lanes, and then it was the parks we're going to discuss whether they were okay in the park paths and river walks. But that never came to fruition, so that was a couple of years ago.
So would you be looking for a motion to maybe deal with the restrictions we can make?
Yes.
So I would make a motion that we restrict these scooters and whatever the term for Segways, the non-branded term for Segways are, Not allow them on the sidewalks and restrict them to the 25 miles an hour is the maximum speed limit.
I'll second that. Anyone comments or concerns?
Yeah, I got a question. Where will they be charged at? It'll be a docking station some point in the city, or?
So this right now, the motion right now, it would be any scooter, regardless of how it docks, whether it's owned by a private citizen in their garage or whether it's commercially rented. My guess is that after this motion, you'll have a second motion on the docking portion of it. So right now, this is just, the motion is looking at, do we want electronic scooters on our sidewalks and on roads that are over 25 miles an hour? Did that answer your question?
I believe typically the way these work is the proprietor scoops up scooters as they drive around in the middle of the night.
They all have GPS
Mm-hmm.
locators on them.
And charges them and swaps them out overnight.
Yeah, I think most companies have like a college kids that they hire to do that, to like move them around and charge them probably.
And then they have to rent space to put them out so customers can pick them up, or?
No,
If they're
no.
not, if they're dockless, no, they can leave them anywhere.
And we
Therein
can't
lies the
regulate where
problem,
they can
Dan.
be left out, or?
And that could be something that could be looked at through the pilot program, but we don't have those details. But again, that's more of the dockless part of this conundrum.
Yeah, so I think that's probably true, so I think you probably vote on the first motion and then we can discuss more about
Mhm.
the pilot.
Anyone else with a comment on Mr. Staples' motion? Then I will call the roll on Mr. Staples' motion.
We
Oh.
have can you reread the?
Sure.
Can you read the motion for us, please?
Basically, the not allowed on the sidewalks or on roadways over 25 miles per hour.
Yes, basically so your motion was that the scooters or that e-scooters and personal assisted mobility devices would not be allowed on sidewalks or streets that have a speed limit in excess of 25 miles per hour.
Everybody clear? All right, please call the roll.
Christensen,
Aye.
Sable,
Aye.
Jazinski,
Aye.
Braunschneider,
Aye.
Becker.
Aye.
Just a question for clarification on that, because I didn't mean to include, and I hope I didn't include, like, if you're, some of these elderly people that can only get around on those little
Correct.
devices, those are not included, because I didn't mean to include those. Okay.
Nope.
Yeah, I know, that's why it's confusing.
Because when you went to the
because-
personal
yeah.
thing, I thought, oh my God, I hope I
I
didn't
still have
include
my
those.
whole Excel sheet here to tell me what is what under
Okay.
this law. But the second part now would be the dockless component, and I will, if we could resolve that as well.
Yeah, so what Mark and Amy had talked about was if we were gonna do something, we would wanna do it as a pilot study so that we had some control over it, so that, you know, we can tell them what we would and wouldn't allow and for how long, so we wouldn't just allow them in and then have them here for however long, and then if we have problems, we have no way to kind of pull the plug on it. So that was our initial thought. And I do, in that, I guess the dock or dockless, that would be one of my big concerns too, is the dockless, but I guess if you did something to pilot, then you could really limit it, like, you know, tell them this is how it's gonna work, and if this happens, then we're gonna stop the pilot or whatever. But yeah. it's-
You also have the authority under state law to outright prohibit them, period, as you were talking about.
And so this would go then, I just want to clarify for the process. So well, the other one's an ordinance, so that will go to council. And then at the same time, we should probably bring whatever this recommendation is forward as well.
And
right?
this would also be an ordinance.
It would, okay.
And the ordinance, depending upon what you vote on, would say they're absolutely prohibited, period. they're prohibited unless it's in a pilot study. And I guess if you go rogue based on your discussion and say, we absolutely want them, we want no restrictions, then we wouldn't need an ordinance, but I don't get that sense listening to you.
I would think that the people, if we did a pilot program doing that, have a vested interest in making sure not too many of them end up in the river, not too many of them get run over, because that's however many hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars each of those costs that they just lost. So they start with a vested interest in being responsible on their end. That doesn't mean that's how they're used. But, and this is something that we would have the option of saying, if we do it in a pilot program and we see how that works, and then we see that, hey, this dockless thing isn't working, we could dial that back?
You could,
Or-
you can, under state law, you have the ability to absolutely
much
ban
anything.
them. Yep.
Okay.
So if the pilot program is not successful,
So would we also have the ability to say, in the case for these commercial things, they've got to make this much noise?
potentially, as part of the pilot program, for the commercial ones.
Right.
We couldn't say it for private side and what we just
I
discussed.
mean, that's
but-
my main concern, is just so you know they're coming.
Yes, I mean, because our fallback is we can prohibit them outright. You cannot operate. There would be more leeway in terms of what we establish as the pilot program. Now, I have had no discussions with any of these manufacturers or the applicant, so there are probably some logistical questions that I do not know.
Okay.
But legally, we would have more flexibility with the pilot program.
Might
Well,
be a-
Should there be a provision for a number of violations which would have a range of examples to be able to reevaluate whether you continue it or drop it, or
I think that's a good idea, Ross, but I think by doing that, you put us in a box too. Oh, it's only the fourth, and we told them they had 5 chances.
well, I just
But-
meant totally.
But 2 people died already.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not a big fan. I understand what you're trying to get at, but
We gotta have a
one
way-
one heinous violation equals 4 minors in my world.
Or shouldn't there be something built in to how to get out of it, the situation?
Oh,
That
yeah.
comes up to the city attorney's office in the writing of the contract
Right, and
for the pilot.
And the program, yeah, and the pilot would probably be, well, I know it would be limited in duration. And then, yes, there would obviously be
I mean,
escape valve
it's
clauses.
a real problem every weekend, let's just say.
Right.
There's gotta be a time of saying, that's it, that's enough.
And I do think and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the plan was to bring, if you decided the route of allowing a pilot program, we were going to bring the pilot program back for consideration here, is that correct or not?
Yeah, we could do that.
With the inherent details.
Maybe
Right,
not.
see what's been negotiated, see.
Maybe, okay, sorry if I missed.
I don't know, I mean, I guess we hadn't gotten that far.
Right.
So, I guess it decide,
That would be my expectation, is as we went through developing parameters for a pilot program, to kind of bring them back for discussion.
It may be a fine point, but we just recommended that we prohibit sidewalk usage. Let's think for a second where these are gonna wind up now. Where do they get dumped? If our boys in blue are parked on the side of the road on Main Street, Mr. Staple, and someone needs to frequent your establishment, they're not gonna leave it on the sidewalk in front of your store, given there's a squad parked 10 feet down the road. So where's it gonna wind up? If they already know it's prohibited on the sidewalk. Something to think about.
Yeah, I would think that the company that did this would have some guidelines, or there would be fines available, and they already have your credit card at that point too, as part of your rental agreement. Like I said, I've rented the pedal powered ones, never the powered ones, and there are certain restrictions in there, and they've got your credit card, so they're holding a lot of the cards at that point. And I'm thinking that's how they keep the bad behaviors down, but I don't know. That's why it depends what gets negotiated and what the contract says.
So I bring that up if for no other reason to make this a clean cut. I don't think it's a good idea, period. We can't prohibit citizens from purchasing their own and driving them on our city streets so long as they're not on a road at 30 miles an hour or greater. But I don't want potentially 10,000 college kids scooting around the college neighborhoods and up and down Wisconsin on scooters at God only knows what time of day or night. Can we restrict to daylight only?
If we're talking commercial, yes.
We can't put a restriction on private
Private.
citizens for daylight only? It's gonna be a problem, but
I imagine they'd have to some type of light or something, just like a
Right.
bike, right? But other than that,
And I don't know if these have, if they're not lighted, then they wouldn't be able to operate on the roadway, but.
well, legally.
And I think you have a good point, Dan, because considering the environment of recent months, it's only gonna get worse, and that kind of attitude's gonna find its way into the scooter business.
So that all being said, I'm gonna put a motion on the table to prohibit the commercial use of scooters within the city of Oshkosh. And also disallow a pilot study as it relates to commercial scooters.
Second,
Any
That
discussion?
include the Segway-like things too?
Yes.
So Segways, right now, this is just the e-scooter part, the commercial
Okay.
rental.
Okay. So I guess no, in answer to your question. Anyone else on that? Comments or questions? All right, seeing no comments or questions, I'm gonna ask that the roll be called.
Christensen,
Aye.
Abel,
No.
Straczynski,
No,
Monschneider,
yes.
Becker.
Yes. Which closes out, I believe, unless there's something else.
yep, no, that's,
Sure.
so I'll work with, Amy and we'll get those ordinances to council for consideration, probably, so it'll be at their next meeting.
And I corrected you by saying not e-scooters, or excuse me, not Segways, but one thing we could include would be bicycles. I apologize for not. So dockless systems, are we also saying, did the motion include any form of dockless system, including bicycles?
Inherently, they all have got the same problem, so that was my view.
Okay,
of it.
perfect.
I don't
Just to
know.
clarify that.
I can't speak for the other four, but I see no objection.
All right, I will go with that the motion was any form of dockless system we want to prohibit, period.
Which then, Mr. Collins, brings us to staff statements.
Okay, I just have thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
I just had a couple things. So just to finish up on the West 9th Avenue layout, council did end up approving the one lane in each direction, but instead of a center turn lane, they approved parking on both sides of the street.
Pardon?
So it'll be one lane in each direction with bike lanes and sidewalks, and then parking allowed on both sides of the street. So that'll be constructed then. Their engineering's working on the bidding documents, probably within the next couple of months. Will be bid out for construction next year. So that's where that ended up. And then secondly, just just for your information, a crosswalk at Hazel and Parkway. We got a request from Bella Vista for a painted crosswalk there, and it's at an intersection already. Should say Parkway, not Parkview. But the crosswalk's going to connect the new trail on the west side of Menominee Park just make the residents a little bit easier to get across the street. So it's technically already a crosswalk, but we were gonna paint it. Public Works has to do a little bit of work because there wasn't a curb cut there. So after we get that done, which will be yet this year, then we'll paint that crosswalk. So it'll make it a little bit easier for those residents to get to the park and back and forth.
Standard paint, I mean,
Yeah.
configuration?
Yeah.
Paint layout, okay.
And that's all I have right now.
Which brings us to agenda items for upcoming meetings. Any requests? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.